Hello and welcome to lesson 1 of week 23. In this lesson we are going to look at object relational mapping, and then we are going to look at a way of using SQLAlchemy to connect to our database and to perform query against the database. My name is Mildred. In previous lessons we saw a basic way of connecting to a database and we created a login register system. This week we are going to look at object relational mapping because this is a method that we are going to use professionally to perform queries against our databases. So object relational mapping is like a programming technique for converting data between a relational database and an object-oriented program. Although we are going to use SQLAlchemy, at some point we are going to look at how to use it with Flask to simplify the method later on. So to start using SQLAlchemy, you want to pip install. So you do pip install SQLAlchemy like this. I have it already installed and I have requirements satisfied. If you don't have it installed, it is going to install it. And then we want to also install MySQL. So if you have it already installed, it's going to satisfy the requirement. So once you have this first installed, you want to check if you already have SQLAlchemy installed. You can go to the Python prompt by typing Python 3 or Python, and then you want to type import SQLAlchemy, and then you want to look at the version by saying SQLAlchemy dot version like this, and then it prints out the version. So what we use SQLAlchemy to do is, its core includes SQL rendering engine. It has database API integration. It allows transaction integration and also the schema description service. We also have something we call the SQL expression language that allows us to use Python code directly in queries, and this is also independent of the backend. Let's try to connect to a database. I'm going to exit out of here. We're going to connect to a database, and let's go to MySQL Workbench. Now recall that we had created a database called users, and we have a registration table in the users database when we created the login register system. We are going to use this users database to illustrate this. I want to use a different driver, which is MySQL connector Python, and before I do that I want to pip install MySQL connector Python like this. I already have it installed, and so it should have requirements already satisfied, and if not, it should install that. And so let's start. For us to connect to a database, we need an engine class. The engine class will connect a pool and a dialect, and when we instantiate that class with the create engine function, it will connect to the database. And the first thing we'll do is let's import from SQLAlchemy. Let's import something we call create engine. So it is this create engine method that we'll use to actually establish the connection. Let's talk about the connection string. So let me create a variable called connection string, and I'm connecting to MySQL, which is the language. So you always want to say the dialect plus the driver, and I said I want to use the driver MySQL connector. So you can also use the PyMySQL here if you want, because we also installed that, but I'm using MySQL connector. And then you put a colon 2// the user. Our user is root. We want to put the password of your MySQL Workbench. So the user is root, and the password, my password that I use for this course is course123, and then what is the name of the host is localhost. If you want to specify the port, you can also specify the port 3306 if that's your port, or your port is different, but it's always default to 3306. And then we have the name of the database now, which is users. So this is our connection string. We have the dialect plus the driver that we are using, and then a colon 2// the name of the user, which is root, the colon, and the password of the root user, which is the same password you use to log into your MySQL Workbench. And then you put at the name of the host, which is usually localhost, and if not localhost, and let's say you're connecting to something on the cloud, that is where it will be, and then / the name of the database. Now we have a connection string. We want to create the engine. So let me say engine will now be equal to create engine, and I'll pass it to the connection string. If I want to have a shortcut for login, which is also accomplished via Python login module, I can just put something like echo equal to true. So this is basically how to connect. When I clear here and I run and I don't get any error, it means that these are successfully connected. So it has successfully connected. Once you run, you don't get an output, but you get no error. It means you have connected successfully. So there are different methods that we use from this, and as we go deeper, we're going to see the different methods that exist for us to use. So now that we have done this, we can now send raw SQL queries by creating a connection object. And for us to create a connection object, recall we did something with like context managers, where we always want to close a connection at the end of the block. So this is where context manager comes in handy again. So let's say with engine.connect has con. I'm not using this. So you can say with engine.connect has con or has connection, whatever name you put here. So has is just an alias for what you want to do. And then you put in your SQL query here and everything that you want to do with your SQL query. I want to be able to pass a query as a string of text. And because of that, I want to import text. And I will say from SQLAlchemy, import text. I can combine it here to say create engine and text here. So I just import all of them at once. Now that I have my text imported, I want to start raw. I want to pass a string of text. So what I want to do now is say connection.execute. So this is one of the method, execute method. And what I want to execute is to create a new table in our users database. So we have a registrations table. Let's say we want to create a table called biometrics here. So let's use this as an example. So I'll say .execute, and then here I'm going to put the text, and inside a pair of quotes I'm going to write my SQL query like this. So what I'll write here now is create table. Let's use if not exist, and we want to create a table called biometric. We want to define the table column. I want an ID to be integer. I also want, let's say, name to be varchar20, or let's make it 50. And then here I am going to go to the next line. Once you have done this, you might want to insert into the table one time, and you still continue to use the same connection. Now recall also in part 1 on this course that when we do insert operations, we commit because they can happen in transactions. So let's say we want to insert into the biometric table an ID. In the ID column and in the name column, we want to insert a value which we use as placeholder. And now I'll tell you this prevents a lot of attacks, SQL injection attacks, and you want to make it a habit to pass parameters instead of data directly into an insert statement. When you pass a parameter, you use a colon like this. So instead of the real value of what we want to put here, you use a colon, an ID, colon name. So this is an alias. And then after a comma, we want to say ID is equal to 1, name is equal to John Doe. Even if we don't want to do it like this, we can pass it as a dictionary. And so when I do this, I can now have a dictionary, and we create dictionaries using a pair of curly braces like this. And then I can say the ID is 1, name is Adam, or name is John Doe. So let's use another name. Let's say name is Adam. And then we can also insert again, but this time we are going to put several dictionary objects here. So we're going to say, I'll copy this. So let's do this, and then we'll test if it works out, and then I will explain it again. So now instead of having just one item, I'm going to put a square bracket like this, and then I'm going to pass a list of dictionaries. And so the next one is going to be, so the next one I have ID2, name Eve, and I can put a next one here as a comma separated list, and then it gives me another list. So I have ID3, name God. So we have that, and I'm going to change this from Adam because it will be duplicate to, let's say, Benjamin. So we have this, and because this is an insert query, we want to commit this transaction, and so we'll say connection.commit. Before I go further, I'm going to test this out. We'll run this, see if we have a biometrics database created, and see if all of what we want is inserted into the biometrics database. So we have duplicate IDs, so I'm going to correct this. So I'll run this. If it works, we explain it again. So run, and everything seems to have connected correctly. So let's go to MySQL Workbench and refresh, and then we have a new biometrics, and let's say use users, and then we want to see select all from biometric. So let's see if all our data is inserted. Now we have it, Adam, Benjamin, Eve, God. So this worked out fine. Let's go over this again, what we did here. The first execute statement here just creates one row because a single dictionary was passed here. The next one executes 3 rows because we have a list of dictionary objects of everything. We make it a habit to pass parameters as values instead of the actual data when we use insert queries, and then we are going to make sure that the key of the dictionary matches the name after the column here. So if the name here is ID, this has to be the key of the dictionary. So there are several ways we can pass this. I use dictionary method instead, so that when we want to insert large list of items, this is how we can do it. So this is a basic way that we created a table with limited number of columns just for us to illustrate this. Now we can query this data. Now, because we use context manager, once we are out of this block, this connection is automatically closed. So we do not have to manage closing connections. And for us to be able to illustrate how to query data, we need to now start another context manager block, and then we're going to try to query the data and see what we get out of it. So this is going to insert more data. So let's say whether we can do insert ignore. I don't know if this will work for here, so that it doesn't insert it if it already exists. And now I want to say something like with. So I want to open a new connection since the old connection is already closed. So I'll say with engine.connect has connection. I want to select all from biometrics, and then I'll say for row in the result, print row. What I'm doing here is putting the connection, the execute query, in a variable called result, so that I can now loop through that result and print out all of the rows returned from the database. And when I clear here and run, if all is well, it should print them out. 1 Adam, 2 Benjamin, 3 Eve, 4 God. And it repeated second time, which means we ran this twice, it inserted this twice, so the ignore did not work here. We just double inserted. So this is how we actually use it in a basic form, and this is one knowledge you need before we actually start building applications and writing or using SQL queries within Python code. This is one application, but this is just the beginning. We are going to be looking deeply at how to use the ORM to write queries in the next lesson.